Hello and a really big warm welcome to this presentation from the Urban Penguin. Today we're going to go through and take a look at how we can use a bash shell script to determine whether or not our Debian based apt cache needs to be updated. We typically always do an apt update, don't we? And then we do an apt install. However, if you've already updated the cache relatively recently, you might find that there's no real need to do it. And it's a little bit of a waste of time, it's a little bit of a waste of resource, so why don't we look at then creating a script to check it? Come on, let's find our command line. And a big warm welcome to the Ubuntu command line. Now we can always check our operating system using the host name ctl command, and this is convenient. It's easy accessible from the command line, and we can see that we're Ubuntu 22.04. But perhaps a little bit more flexible is to take a look at the file /etc/os release. This can be really useful because I can see then that we are Ubuntu, but we've also got ID_like, and this is then like Debian-based systems. Now, you're probably familiar if you're working with products like Puppet or Ansible, working with the OS family, and you'll know you're going to do one set of things for Red Hat-based systems, another type of thing for our Debian-based systems. If we're going to be working with the apt cache, we can make use of the ID like. So moving back then to my Raspberry Pi, we can cat out that same file. I'm going to find this on Red Hat-based systems as well as Debian-based systems, but we can see then the ID_like being set to lowercase Debian. And it's this value that I can start putting into my script. If I want to work with anything to do with the APT package manager, I want to make sure that I am on a Debian-based system. So this is a great starting point. Now, the reality is it doesn't really matter which system I'm working on. I could stay working on my Raspberry Pi, or I could move back to my Ubuntu system. For the moment, I'm going to move back to my Ubuntu system, and we want to look at the nuts and bolts of what we're going to put in the script. And we're going to begin by taking a look at where our apt metadata is going to be stored. So if I start running a long listing on the metadata data file, and that's going to be located at var cache apt, and then as I navigate my way through, we should be able to find the pkgcache.bin. Now when we look at this has been updated today, so we are probably good to go without having to run an apt update before installing software. However, we probably don't want to navigate down and check this. So if we could automate the process by building it into a script, it would be useful. When we're looking at automating processes, dates like this don't work well for scripts. They're hard to work with programmatically. But if I look at the date command to get the current date and time, and if I look at it in quite an unfriendly manner by using +% lowercase s, this is unfriendly, isn't it? However, it's very script friendly. This is a number of seconds that have elapsed since the 1st of January 1970. And look, there are quite a few seconds that have elapsed. This then becomes something we can really work with within a script. And in the same way, we can look at our last update time for our pkgcache.bin using the stat command and +% or -c rather in stat, and then %y. With this then we're going to be able to see when it was last updated and put in the path through to the file, and that again then I can use escape and dot to cycle through my last arguments, and we can see then that it's been updated relatively recently, so we could probably get away just installing software. But as I say, we want to put this as part of our script and have the script do all of the work for us, rather than us trying to have to work it out through these mathematical sums. So this is where our script is going to come in, and this is where learning a little bit about bash scripting can be really useful to you in your administration tasks. So let's go through and create ourselves a script. You can use any editor you like. I just happen to be using Vim here. And as we then go through, it doesn't matter what I'm calling it, but let's call it aptcache.sh. The first thing typically we put into a script is the shebang. This is the path to the script interpreter. I know it's commented, but it's read by the system. We can use the source command to read in the OS release file. And that OS release file then has got those variables like ID and ID_like. I'm just going to set the syntax highlighting so it's a little bit more readable on a dark background. So we're reading in the file os-release and we're using the source command. The source command reads in that file to the current script. We could use the dot command. The dot command is available both in the Bourne shell as well as the bash shell, whereas source is available in the bash shell, but you won't get it if you're running the more simple /bin/sh. Source, though, definitely makes it more readable, doesn't it? Just using a dot there is so confusing. Now as we go through, I can put my if statement, and we can then test for our variable that has been read from our etc OS release. So we can go in and put $ID_like, and we can test for it being equal to lowercase Debian. Now, if this then evaluates to true, we can go ahead and do our apt stuff. So we can put our semicolon, and then we don't need to indent inside of bash scripts, but it makes it more readable. I'm just going to set a variable for where my package cache file is going to be located. It's going to be easier than having to write the path to the file, especially if I need to write it multiple times. Probably I'm only going to use it once, but then you never know, later on I might want to access it again. So if we set up our variables early on in the script, it probably works better for us. So make sure we've got the path to the file correct. So that's one variable, but we're going to need more variables. We need to go through and grab our current time, the update time for this file, and then we can work on our time difference. So let's go through and specify our current underscore time, and that's going to be equal to the output of the command date plus % lowercase s. So that's going to give me the Linux epoch time. So let's get that set up properly. We can continue then, and we're going to put in our updated time. So the last time the package cache was updated, and we can get that using the stat command. The stat command gives me access to more of the metadata, and that includes the Linux epoch time, which we get through -c %y. And of course, we've got to make sure that we are working on our pkgcache_file. Close off the parentheses for that. Now that we've got the current and updated time, the time difference, we can set up a variable for that, is going to be the current time minus the updated time. We can use double parentheses here, so this allows for an enhanced expressions. Here I don't then need to worry about putting in parentheses or dollar symbols rather for my variables. And we can set our threshold. I'm going to set the threshold to 1 day. 1 day is going to be 86,400 seconds. If we're less than a day, since we've updated, we probably don't need to update, I would generally say. So that should be a good figure to work with. We can then test for this. So if our time difference is going to be less than or equal to the threshold variable. Then we can go and do something. But we don't really need to do a lot. Let's just echo something back so we know that we've acknowledged we've got an up-to-date cache. So we can put better wording than I'm doing here, but for speed, I'm just going to go cache is up to date. And then we can go through and look at what to do. So let's move back. We can use Control and D to move back our indent level. And we can then go through and put our else statement. And this is where we probably want to give a little bit of a warning that our apt cache needs updating. But we can go ahead then and do our sudo apt update to make sure then that we do have the up-to-date cache. This is what I mean about automating the process. Now we could also then worry about installing packages here if we want. We could extend the script later to accept arguments, but we'll just leave it like this for the moment. So this is the end of my if statement. Now I'm not going to be looking for any other, maybe Red Hat based systems, something like that. So I don't need to worry about further operations if we're not a Debian based system. So I'm happy now to go through and close the external if statement. So we've got the internal if statement, and now we've got the external if statement all closed. And if I look now at executing this, drum roll please, bash, and then running through our apt cache, and we can see then that our cache is up to date. Now we can actually change this. If we use sudo and touch, often people just use touch for creating a new file. But we've got an argument -d where we can specify the date, but touch, if a file exists, will go through and change the timestamps of a file. If we specify the date to change it to, i.e. in this case 7 days ago, for our var cache apt and pkgcache.bin, then of course now our cache is going to appear out of date. So as we go through and run our apt cache, it says it needs updating, it goes and updates it, probably doesn't need to do anything because potentially it was up to date, but executing it again now, the last modified timestamp on our metadata file will have changed, so of course then it is now up to date. Let's grab our script and just sneakily copy it across through to our Raspberry Pi. And let's go through then and add it in on our Raspberry Pi. As we saw before, this was the same type of operating system, the ID_like variable in our OS release. We can go through then and paste this in. And that all looks like it's copied across nicely. So we can go through and execute it on here. And we can see, well, look, this certainly needed updating. So it goes ahead and actually does some work now. And we can see then that it does take a little while for the package cache metadata to come down from the repositories. But of course, in doing so, we've updated our package cache file, so our cache now is up to date. So this becomes a really good way that we can go through and perhaps check the cache before updating it, but ideally extend the script to accept arguments so we could build our package install into this, so we can install packages only updating the cache if we need.
All that is left to say is thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this, then you are probably sadder than I first thought. For more of this drivel, please subscribe, like and comment to @TheUrbanPenguin.